Good evening, everyone, and B'chvod Rav. I'd like to thank the Rav again for taking his time to answer our questions. As I said at the beginning of the previous Q&A session, those who are interested in getting more involved in Machon Shilo on a local level are welcome to fill in this questionnaire, which I'm putting in the chat now. And it is also for those watching the recording on YouTube, it's in the YouTube video description. This is the second part of an unthemed Q&A session. There was no requirement to submit questions on any particular topic, and the Rav has kindly offered to do this second session to get through the questions that were not answered in the time last week. I'm going to get started with the first question, which is from Svi in Queens. The question is one obligated to give tzedakah, or is it just a good thing to do? Does paying school tuition count towards tzedakah, and does paying taxes, where a percentage of them goes to social services, also count towards tzedakah?
All right. I will quote briefly from Rambam. In Hilchot Matanot Aniyim Perek Tzait, Rambam says, Kol ir sheyesh ba Yisrael, wherever you have a yishuv, a community of Jews, any town or place, hayovim laha'amid gaba'et tzedakah. The community is required, and this is Minat Torah, to set up a system for raising tzedakah as a tax from every resident. The Gaba'im are the people who are in charge of the geviyah, of the arranging and demanding these payments from people, and then later dispersing the monies to those who are in need. And Rambam goes on to say in Halacha Gimel, in the same Perek Tet, Hilchot Matanot Aniyim, Me'olam lo ra'inu v'lo shamanu. I have never heard, says Rambam, or seen of a place, B'kahal mi'Yisrael, where there is a Jewish community, she'en lahem kupa shel tzedakah, that does not have such a system of tzedakah in place. There is a daily amount that is given to give to people who are hungry on a daily basis, and there is a weekly amount that was dispersed, as Rambam describes here at length. I won't go into all of it. But you see from these statements of Rambam, which are based on the Mishnah, the end of Masechet Pe'ah, and many other sources, that tzedakah is an absolutely essential mitzvah. It is not an optional extra. Rambam further says in the next Perek Yod, Hayavim anu lizaher b'mitzvah tzedakah. We must be very particular about performing this mitzvah of tzedakah. Yafer mikol mitzvot haseh, more than any other mitzvot haseh. Shahasadakah siman litzadikeh zera Avraham Avinu. This is a sign, and this is a characteristic behavior to all descendants of Avraham Avinu, and all those who join the Jewish people. So, in brief, the answer is, without a doubt, tzedakah is a requirement. Yes.
And I think the second part of the question from Svi was, what if one's already paying social services? Does that contribute?
Paying school tuition does not count towards tzedakah. As for whether paying taxes that one pays for various social services in Chutz La'aretz, where most of the funds are dispersed to non-Jews, some probably also are dispersed to Jews, but most of those funds are not. There, the paying of such taxes that go to such services is not considered tzedakah. In Eretz Yisrael, where most of the money, again, not all, unfortunately, but most of the money which is dispersed by Bituach Leumi and other social services to the needy, people in different forms of experiencing different types of difficulty, there it can be counted towards tzedakah. This has been discussed by various poskim already many decades ago. And yet one should still give tzedakah, at least some extra tzedakah beyond those taxes, so that there is a clear act of giving tzedakah, and that we should not forget or find ourselves in a situation where tzedakah is something which we tend to overlook and forget about. It is something we should do on a regular basis, according to his ability. And yes, you can take into account in Israel, in Eretz Yisrael, you may take into account the various taxes that you pay, but nevertheless, there are other worthy causes that one should give at least some tzedakah to.
Okay, thank you, Arav. I don't think we have Svi on the line at the moment, so we'll move on to the next question, which is from Gabriel Martindale in Yerushalayim. How careful must we be to keep the rules of dikduk in tefillah and brachot? For example, should we say boreh feri ha'adama with a soft pei because it follows a word that ends with a guttural? Should we say boreh feri hagefen with a segol or hagafen with a kamatz?
This is a good question. And frankly, I don't know if there is a definitive answer. It is interesting to note that in the very earliest manuscript, which I'm just calling up in front of me now on my screen, in fact, perhaps I will share this briefly with you. Can I be allowed to share a screen for a moment?
Yep, let me allow that. Should be okay now.
All right, so can you now see the beginning of the 6th parak of Masechet Berachot in the Mishnah?
Yes.
In Ktav Yad Kaufman, the Kaufman manuscript, which the manuscript itself was probably written around the time of Rashi, perhaps even a bit earlier in Italy. And about 100 years later, perhaps, another scribe was menaked. He vocalized the text of the Mishnah. This is the earliest text of the Mishnah that we have, and it's the earliest vocalized text that we have. And it's very interesting to note that if you look here on the right-hand column, Kesad mevarachim ala perot. This is the beginning of the 6th parak of Masechet Berachot. Al perot ha'ilan hu omer boreh, and you can see clearly feri ha'is. There are mistakes, by the way, in the nikud here. The reason for this should be pointed out. This is relevant. It's clear from the fact that the scribe who introduced the vocalization onto the manuscript, which is not the original scribe, it is clear that he was Sfaradi. Why is it clear? Because he frequently confuses a chames and a patah, because Sfaradim do not distinguish between a chames and a patah. So we see, for example, it says here boreh feri, and it should say ha'is, which should be a chames under the hay, but it's actually a patah. And this happens frequently. Sometimes he gets it right, sometimes he gets it wrong, because he's not really used to the distinction, and it's difficult for him. If this manuscript had been menukad by a Ashkenazi or a Temani, for example, then there would be no such error, or almost no such error. But here it's about half of the time, or 40% of the time you find such things in this manuscript. Hus min hayayin, shal hayayin hu omer boreh, and again you see fari hagefen. How do I see fari? Because there's no dot in the fe, and there's also a line above the pei. The oth pei has a line above it, which is an indication of an oth refuya, a soft pei and not a hard pei. So it's a fe as opposed to a pe. So you see that according to the tradition of this Sfaradi scribe, approximately 950 years ago, maybe even 1,000 years ago, you see that his tradition was, his minhag, and what he must have grown up with, was to pronounce it fari adama. Does that mean that we have to agree with this nikud? No, not necessarily, because I think to some extent it depends on how you read the bracha. If you read it boreh fari, in other words, boreh fari, the boreh and the pari, those two words are written together without a break between them, and then it makes sense to say boreh fari, because that's how it would be in the Tanakh. And the rules of Dikduk, after all, are simply a reflection of what we normally see in the Tanakh. In the Tanakh also, by the way, there are exceptions to the very same rules of Dikduk, which are based on the Tanakh. In other words, 90% of the time it's one way, but 10% of the time, or 5% of the time, it's done another way. So you cannot come to a pasuk in the Tanakh and say this pasuk is against Dikduk. No, Dikduk is based on what we see in the Tanakh as a rule, but there are many exceptions and early usages or later usages in the Tanakh as well. So if you read it boreh fari, as in together without a break, then it makes sense to read that pei as a pei refuya fari. But you could also read the bracha boreh pari ha'es. Hashem creates. What does He create? Pari ha'es. There's a break between the boreh and the pari, and this apparently is the tradition of the Ashkenazim, because all the Ashkenazim say boreh pari ha'adama, boreh pari ha'es. In other words, they are reading it with a hefsek. Boreh, what does Hashem create? Pari ha'es, the fruit of the tree. Pari ha'adama, the fruit of the earth. Whereas the Sfaradim and the Tamanim, by the way, also interestingly pronounce it this way. They say boreh fari ha'es. They're reading it. Hashem creates the fruit. What fruit? Of the tree or of the earth. So, in this particular case, I don't feel bound by what I see here in this Kitav Yad. This apparently, there was such a tradition, a very ancient tradition, but I think there was probably another equally ancient and valid tradition that read it otherwise. My personal practice is to say boreh pari hagefen, that's the next question, or ha'es or hadama. With regards to the question was also about the hagefen or hagafen. This is also an interesting question, a slightly different question. In this case, it might depend more on whether the pronunciation of words in tefillah, in barachot, is to be done according to the usual rules of Dikduk, again, the usual, what we find normally in the Tanakh, or was the Lashon of Hazal, who instituted these barachot, was it their practice to pronounce things and menaked things, to vocalize things differently from the usual system that we find in the Tanakh. For example, it's clear that I won't go into this matter at great length, but it's clear for many reasons that the more ancient girsah, the more ancient reading of the words, for instance, in Nishmat is mi yidmeh lach, not mi yidmeh lecha, ela mi yidmeh lach. Now, the fact is, in the Torah itself, we find being Hashem is referred to sometimes as rather we are referred to, the Shema gives us sometimes lecha, and sometimes we are referred to, I'm referred to as lach. So it can go either way. Lach and lecha are both possible usages, but in the Tanakh, usually for something which is considered masculine, lecha is the normal term. Lach exists, but it's less frequent. Whereas in Lashon Hazal, apparently it was the other way around. Again, this is not a hard and fast rule. It's certainly not halacha, but it's quite clear from all the ancient sources that when the Lashon of Hazal, the Lashon of the Mishnah, the Lashon of the Tefillot and the Barachot was not entirely, in fact, it was quite clearly distinct from the usually the fairly consistent and usual patterns of dikduk that we find in the Tanakh. And therefore, according to the rules of the Tanakh, we should say boreh, either pari or fari, as we explained, hagafen, because it's the end of a sentence. Hagafen, that's how it would appear in the Tanakh. Any pasuk where that word appeared at the end would be hagafen and not hagafen. But did Chazal pronounce it so when they pronounced the barachot? Did the Jews at that time pronounce it so when they pronounced the bracha? I do not think that anyone can really know for a fact. And I'm not certain the Sfaradim and the Temanim say hagefen. Ashkenazim today say hagafen. I am not certain what Ashkenazim said on this particular point centuries ago, because this could well be an example of a tikkun, with or without, inverted commas, of certain maskilim who were motivated to change the nikud of the tefillot. This is something I have not sufficiently researched, perhaps. But I do not see anything at all wrong with following the rules of the Tanakh in this case, and in many other cases, and saying boreh, pari, hagafen. And that's what I do.
Thank you, Harav. For the next question, Harav, would it be okay if we stop the screen share so that people watching the video can see the Harav's face?
Yes, I'll start the share.
Thank you very much. The next question is from Alex in Chicago. Does tallit katan require tzitzit? And if so, what's the minimum size of the beged that requires it? If it doesn't require, or if one is wearing a beged smaller than the minimum size, is there a problem to wear such a tallit katan outside in a reshut harabim on Shabbat if one does not hold by the eruv, or if there is no eruv?
This is a very good question, and not everyone perhaps is familiar with the background to this question, so let me explain briefly. There is a mahaloketh between the Rishonim whether if one wears a garment which has 4 corners, we know that you're hayav to place tzitizit on the 4 corners of such a garment. But is this the case only during the day or also at night? According to Rashi and Rambam and the Rif, if you wear a garment, even if it's a garment that you normally wear, we'll call it a tallit for the purpose of our discussion, which just means a 4-cornered garment. If you wear a tallit, which you normally wear during the day, but now you're wearing it at night, you're actually patur. You do not have to have tzitzit on this bered, on this garment at nighttime. It's only hayav during the daytime. Rabbeinu Tam, the Rosh, and Rabbeinu Shimshon Mishantz and others hold that which is patur from tzitzit is kesuf laila, but it doesn't go by the time, it goes by the garment itself. So kesuf laila, that which is normally worn during the nighttime, such as pajamas, shall we say, if they happen to have 4 corners, some kind of cloak that you wear when you sleep, I don't know, some kind of blanket or that you wrap around yourself at night, that's called a kasut laila. That is patur from tzitizit. You do not have to place tzitizit on such a boreh, even if you wear it during the day. Okay, that's a general machloket. The Shulchan Aruch, for example, says that we don't know what the halacha is, and therefore you have to be choshesh, you have to act in accordance with both of these opinions, which means what, practically speaking, that you cannot make a bracha on a tallit with tzitizit at night, where according to Rambam and Rashi you cannot. According to Rabbeinu Tam and the Rosh and Rash Mishans you can. Laniyuf da'ati, it is quite clear to me that the halacha is like Rabbeinu Tam and the Rabbeinu Shimshon Mishans and the Rosh, that it is only a kasut laila that is patur, but any normal garment that you wear during the daytime, or that you wear both during the day and during the night, is hayav b'tzitzit. So if you wear, so when I put this beged on now, this tallit that I'm wearing right now, just before we began this shiur, I made a bracha even though it was nighttime. That is, and I think that shita, to my mind, is much more clear cut and obvious and correct. And I think the Yerushalmi supports that in Masechet Kiddushin, as the Rosh and others point out. All right, so that's one discussion. Now, taking all that into account, what happens on Shabbat? There's another consideration, another halacha. May one wear a tallit with tzitizit, which is the requisite size, and the tzitizit are kesherot, everything is fine. May you wear them on Shabbat? Is considered that you're carrying the tzitizit on Shabbat, b'reshut harabim, or is it part of the beged? So the answer to that is no, it's part of the beged. It's minoi hasisit or mitach siso, as Rambam writes in Ilchot Shabbat Perek Yotef. It is part of the beged. It is noi. It is beautiful and seemly and becoming for the garment to be so decked out, and there's no problem at all wearing a tallit with tzitizit on it on Shabbat b'reshut harabim. However, if the tzitizit is pesula, in other words, let's say there are 3 tzitizit on the boreh, but the fourth one you didn't manage to tie before Shabbat. You got a new tallit, you tied 3 corners, and the fourth corner has not yet got tzitizit. And seeing that the halacha, the Mishnah states in Masechet Menachot, arba tzitizit ma'akvot zo et zo, you have to have 4. To perform the mitzvah. 3 is not enough, as if you have no tzitizit at all when you have just the 3. So you may not wear a tallit which has not got kosher tzitizit, where the mitzvah is not properly performed on Shabbat b'reshut harabim, where there's no proper eruv, etc. In other words, if there's b'reshut harabim, then you know that I think there's not going to be an eruv. So then you may not wear such a thing. With regards to the size of a tallit katan, this is also relevant, or any tallit for that matter. Again, we're trying to be brief here this evening, so I'll keep it brief. In my view, and I measured this years and years ago, I experimented and I placed different size garments on different aged children, and I considered the matter at some length. In my view, a tallit-shaped garment, a 4-cornered garment, which is 120 centimeters in length and 60 centimeters in width, is hayav b'tzitzit. Less than that is not hayav b'tzitzit. That is my view. That means that most of the talitot hakatanot, most of the small talitot that people wear over their shirts, under their shirts, whatever it may be, most of them do not qualify according to that. Some of the very, very big ones will, but most of what most people wear, even the larger sizes, tend to be a little bit less than that. So I would say that if one is wearing such a beged that is smaller than that size, one should not wear it b'reshut harabim on Shabbat, because it's like wearing a tallit which is not mesuyas kehilchata, because the idea of a beged that is mesuyas kehilchato means that you're performing a mitzvah. That this beged requires the tzitizit, you're performing the mitzvah by wearing it with the tzitizit, and everything is fine. But if, as we explained, the tzitizit is not kasher, there's one of them is missing, shall we say, then you're not performing the mitzvah, and then they are considered masoi. They are considered something that's just being schlepped along, and it's not noi la beged. It's not a beautiful and required addition to the garment, and therefore you should not wear that on Shabbat. So, I reiterate, if the beged is too small, which is the case, unfortunately, with most talitot katanot, I would say do not wear it b'reshut harabim. If the beged is the right size, but there's a problem with the tzitzit, the way it's tied, it cannot be worn b'reshut harabim. I'll just complete this topic by adding that it's well known that the Rif was of the opinion, he wrote a teshuvah about this, the Rif was of the opinion that you may not wear a tallit, even if it's kashera, it's the right size and it has 4 tzitziot, everything is fine, you may not wear it on Erev Shabbat at night, because there's no mitzvah of tzitzit at night, according to the Rif. He holds like Rashi and the Rambam. However, Rambam, who also holds that there is no mitzvah of tzitzit at night, like the Rif, on this point he vehemently disagrees with the Rif. The Rambam also has a teshuvah on this subject, and he explains very lucidly why the Rif on this particular occasion is not correct, and that no one before the Rif ever thought such a thing, and that it is entirely mutar to wear a beged with tzitzit, even on Leil Shabbat, b'reshut harabim, there's no problem at all, unless the tzitzit is pesula, or too small.
Thank you, Harav. Alex, do you have anything to be clarified there?
No, I'm good. Thanks very much.
Great. Okay. The next question is from me. I recently bought a gufiya tzitzit, a polyester T-shirt with gaps down the sides to give it 4 corners. I want to sew the gaps together to make it more wearable in public as an outer garment. How far down can I sew the sides together before it ceases to have 4 halachic corners? Can I say a bracha on it, even though it is from polyester? Can I wear it directly on my skin? And is it asur to trim the tzitzit with metal scissors?
All right, I'll deal first with the last 3 questions, which are more straightforward. Can one say a bracha on a beged which is from polyester or other materials such as cotton, what have you, and not from wool or linen? That is a mahloket in the Talmud, apparently perhaps even amongst the Tanaim. Most of the Rishonim, and I think that is the pshat of the Sugyan Masechet Menachot and the Talmud Bavli, hold that all types of material are hayav min haTorah b'tzitzit. So I think that you can make a bracha on a tallit or a garment made of other materials other than wool and linen. According to Rif and Rambam, min haTorah, the mitzvah is only wool and linen. Other materials are also hayav, but midarabanan, midivrei sefarim. I tend to accept and understand the matter according to the other opinion, which is that all materials are equally hayav min haTorah. So yes, you can make a bracha, no question. Can you wear it directly on your skin? Absolutely yes. No reason why one should not do so. Is one permitted to trim the tzitzit with metal scissors? Not only is it mutar, in my view, I think it's even possibly a hidur, because if you take the tzitzit, I'll show you my tzitzit here, for example. You can see that I did it here also. You can see them roughly the same length. They work out to be the same length because maybe here I didn't need to because they worked out that way anyhow, but maybe there's another one. I'm not sure if there's a very good example here. Yeah, perhaps this one is a good example. My minhag is having tied tzitzit to, when I see the length is correct, everything is in order, I cut them with scissors so they're equal in length. I think that's noi l'tzitzit. I think it looks nicer and more mechubad in that fashion, as opposed to having one long or one short. It's not a chova, but I think it's even a good idea, and it's certainly mutar. Now, with regards to the first question, the halacha is that the boreh, the garment, has to be more than 50% open to be considered, so that you can consider it to have 4 corners. In other words, you cannot take some kind of a garment like a skirt or a dress or a jalabiyah and cut little incisions on the side so that you have a small opening and you have 2 little corners here and 2 little corners there. That's not called arba kanafoth. It has to be more than half. In other words, and how do you measure that? From if you're talking about such a thing like a tallit katan or some kind of a cloak or coat that you wear, which you pull over your head like a woman's dress or something like that, like a jalabiyah again, you measure it from the shoulder, from the top of the beggar, which is the top of the beggar. That's where it begins really, and you measure it all the way to the bottom of the beggar, whatever the length of the beggar is. So if it's a very long beggar, let's say it goes down to below your knees, then you need just over 50% of that length, which means that it would have to be closed for quite a way down. Let's say the total length was, for argument's sake, 1.20 meters, then you would have to have a little over 60 centimeters open from the bottom up. If the beggar is shorter, let's say it only gets down to your belt, shall we say, or something like that, then again you measure from the shoulder down to the bottom, and more than 50% of that has to be open. When I say open, that means it cannot be sewn together, but it can have snaps or tic-tacs or press studs or whatever term you use to close them. That is okay, but they cannot be sewn together.
And then presumably buttons would be sufficient as well.
Correct.
That you can open and close.
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
Thank you, Arav. The next question is from Chaim Ginsberg in New York. May one pray Arvit between the plag hamincha and shkiya, even lechatchila, or without any pressing reason that requires one to do so?
Another good question. Here also, there is more than one opinion. Interestingly, at least several of the Gaonim, specifically Rav Hai Gaon, explains this, goes into this question at great length, and we have his perush on the matter before us. And other Gaonim explain that if you, on a given day, if you daven minha before plag hamincha, which just explain the terminologies in case there are those who are unfamiliar with the terms. The halachic day is divided from sunrise to sunset. So an average day, roughly, let's say, in Israel is 6 to 6. Let's just say it's not precisely so, but it's roughly so. So it's 12 hours daylight and 12 hours dark. That's the average day of the year, which is around Pesach or Sukkot time, roughly. You divide the time from 6 to 6, if that's what it is, into 12 equal parts. Each of those equal parts is 1 halachic hour, or a sha'a zamanith. But it makes no difference if we're talking about the middle of winter, when there's only 9 hours, shall we say, of daylight, or in the middle of summer when there's 14 and a half hours of daylight, shall we say. Whatever the time from sunrise to sunset, that is defined, that is the day, and for this purpose, you divide that into 12 equal parts. Plag hamincha is 1.25 hours before sunset. So if the sun sets if it's a day of 6 to 6 and the sun sets at 6, so plag hamincha is 4:45. So if you daven minha before plag hamincha, you may daven lechatchila Arvit after plag hamincha. Why is this so? Because the mitzvah of Arvit is not the same. It is not the same mitzvah as kriyat Shema. People tend to conflate these two mitzvot as if they're one, but they're not. They're two distinct, separate mitzvot, and they have separate, distinct halachic time frames. The time frame for kriyat Shema begins at set hakochavim, when 3 stars are visible, which the average day of the year in Eretz Yisrael is roughly 20 minutes after the shkiya, and in the middle of summer it's more like 28 minutes, and in the middle of winter it's more like 16, 17 minutes. From that time you can read kriyat Shema. But the zman lechatchila for anybody to daven Arvit is immediately after the sun sets. You don't have to wait for stars. So you can say Arvit right after the sun sets, and you can say kriyat Shema later, for example. In which case you're not being somech gura letfilah. You're not doing one immediately. You're not juxtaposing the two, but you can do so. So according to at least some of the Gaonim, you may always choose to daven mincha according to Rabbi Yehuda, because according to Rabbi Yehuda, the end of Zman mincha is plag hamincha. And then you can daven Arvit according to Rabbi Yehuda from plag hamincha onwards, because according to him, that is when Zman Arvit begins every day of the year. From that point on, you can no longer daven mincha. That's according to Rabbi Yehuda. According to the hakochavim, you can daven mincha till the shkiya, ad ha'erev, till the sun sets, and Zman Arvit begins immediately after sunset. This is true for, as I said, for several of the Gaonim. The Rif and the Rambam actually, interestingly, do not agree. They understand that you may do so lechatchila only on Erev Shabbat or on Shabbat itself. In other words, when one, for example, wishes to bring in Shabbat early, one may daven Arvit shel Shabbat already when it's still Friday, when the sun is still shining, and they don't mention plag hamincha. They don't mention that as a cutoff point. At any rate, lahalacha u'lema'aseh, seeing that tefillat Arvit is reshut, even though according to the Shema you have to daven it, but it's still considered reshut. It's still on a lower level of chova as compared to Arvit and mincha. As Rambam also writes, because Arvit is reshut, as mekilimba, it is mutar to be more mekel about the time frame of Arvit. So if one wishes to daven Arvit lechatchila after plag hamincha, assuming one davened mincha before plag hamincha, it is mutar.
Thank you, Harav. Chaim, did you have anything to have clarified?
Yes. Does the Rav hold in accordance with those Rishonim that understand that one must choose the same opinion every day? I mean, the Talmud Bavli ends off Da'avid Kimar Avid, Da'avid Kimar Avid. Must one stick with the same shita, or can one switch off from day to day?
I think it goes by the specific day. If you daven mincha on a given day, but before plag hamincha, you can daven Arvit after plag hamincha. On another day, you can do otherwise. You don't have to. There's no such concept as having to choose one shita for a whole life. I don't see any. There are a few Rishonim who suggest this, not many, but I do not see any basis for this claim.
Okay, thank you. The next question is anonymous. We usually make early Shabbat in the summer. Most people think that when you do this, you can say birchot kriyat Shema while it is still light. The Rav has explained in the past that this is incorrect. In light of this, would we transgress livnei iver by inviting a guest for Friday night dinner who we know would not normally make early Shabbat? By inviting him, he will end up going to shul and doing what everyone else does, and will say brachot levatala, whereas he would otherwise have said the brachot at the correct time.
All right, so this question comes quite correctly on the heels of the previous question. As I explained, kriyat Shema and tefillah are two separate, distinct mitzvot, and they have distinct time frames. When one wants to bring in Shabbat early, which is mutar and even a mitzvah to do, without any pressing reason. One doesn't need a particular reason to do so. One may do so every Shabbat of the year if one wishes to, although normally it would be in the summer. And one may daven Arvit Shabbat when it is still Friday afternoon, when the sun is still up. As I said before, according to most Gaonim and Rishonim, they specify this has to be after plag hamincha. Rif and Rambam don't mention plag hamincha, but it's clear from what they write that they mean after plag hamincha and close towards the end of the day. You may do that lechatchila, no problem. As I have also explained, as the person asking the question states correctly, it is completely without basis to think that you may recite the brachot of kriyat Shema shel Arvit when the sun is still shining. It's even dubious whether you should say the brachot after the shkiya, but certainly before the sun has set, there's absolutely no basis for that at all. There are one or two Rishonim who say it's okay, but all the other Rishonim disagree, and kach nir'eh barur. Now, the fact is, most people believe, and there are certainly also some poskim who say that yes, you can say Birkot Kriyat Shema when you bring in Shabbat early, even though it's still daylight outside. You don't have to take upon yourself when you invite someone to retrain them and go through all the various halachot that may be involved in him coming over to you for Leil Shabbat. If you want to, I think a person can say, you should know that my practice, if you invite someone to your place, shall we say, you can tell them, well, we're going to go to shul, we're going to daven early, bring in Shabbat early, but you should know my practice is only to say the tefillah, not the kriyat Shema. And at that point, the person will probably ask you why. And at that point, you have the perfect opportunity to explain to him briefly why. And you can tell him that either this is my position or this is the position of my Rav. You can also mention, just by the way, much more important than this Rav or that Rav is the fact that 99% of the Rishonim make this point very clear and explicitly. And that's what you do. And then it's up to him. Whatever he chooses to do, he can do. And you don't have to be concerned. You don't have to feel responsible for what he does after that point.
Okay, thank you. The next question is from me. In Hilchot Yichud, does the heter of Ba'ala Ba'ir also apply to for Ishto Ba'ir, i.e. if the husband is at home, for example, in the presence of a babysitter or a cleaner, and his wife is in the same city? If she is not in the same city, is there any way of making it permissible to hire a female babysitter to look after children when the husband is home alone? And this is in a case where it is not practical to ask a neighbor to check on you every so often.
This is a tricky question because on the one hand, it's clear that it is in certain situations and circumstances, it would be very difficult to work around this issue. So when a man's wife is around, is in the city, is in the neighborhood, and may show up, there's no problem. I think the heter does apply also, just as it applies Ba'ala Ba'ir also applies to Ishto Ba'ir. But when this is not the case, I would definitely try to make a great effort to find someone who will check on you every so often, leave the front door open, and things of this nature to obviate the problem. That's all I can really say.
Okay, thank you. We now have a question from David in Yerushalayim. Should Friday night kiddush start with Vayhi Erev, Vayhi Boker, Vayhi Chulu, or Yom HaShishi?
I think correct thing, and this is also what we find in the Rambam, and I will very briefly quote from the Rambam, and this is what we find in all the ancient sources. This is in Sefer Zamanim, Ilchot Shabbath, Perek Kaftef. Rambam writes, in Perek Kaftet Halacha Zayin, Rambam describes exactly how one makes kiddush, and he writes, "Uminhag pashut b'chol Yisrael." It is the standard practice throughout all the Jewish people do this. Likroth batahila parashat vayichulu, from which one understands that one begins with vayichulu, and that is certainly my practice, and this is what one finds in all the ancient sources. The other minhagim of reciting either Yom HaShishi or Vayhi Arev, Vayhi Voker, etc. These are all much later and baseless practices. One of the ideas is, for example, by saying these words, you have 4 words, the first letter of each word forming the Shem Hashem. And that's why is one required to do that? On what is that based? It's not based on anything. It's one of these folk halachot. It's not of any has no meaning and no importance whatever. So begin with vayichulu, recite. That's how the pasuk begins. That's a small parasha. That's how it begins. Recite vayichulu, and then the brachot.
Okay, thank you. I don't see David on the line, so let's move on to the next question from Chaim Ginsberg in New York. Is one allowed to sit on a bench that has sefarim on it?
This halacha is based on the fact that Hazal state that one may not sit on a bench or a chair or a bed on which there is a Sefer Torah. And that is certainly true. And that is quoted in all the sources. Rambam quotes this explicitly, for example. From a Sefer Torah, it was extrapolated by other posakim. This should apply also to other Sifrei Kodesh. It's not mefurash in Hazal. It's not mentioned in the Talmud, but it certainly makes sense mitzad kvodat Torah not to act in that way. So I think the bottom line is that one should not do so.
Okay, thank you. I have anything to clarify there?
And that would be, nowadays, like our sefarim are all printed out, like that wouldn't make a difference as opposed to they used to be all handwritten, obviously.
The fact that they're printed is not a sufficient reason to inhok bahem minhag bizayon. Rather than focus on the fact that they're printed on paper, let us focus on the fact let us focus on what is written on those pages. We're talking about Divrei Torah, and we're all Mesuim, we're all commanded to respect the Torah to the utmost. So I think it is definitely correct not to do so.
And I've seen also people do certain things like stand them up, like they would open up the sefer to kind of like hoist it up, or if it's on a bench to lean it against the back of the bench. Would that make a difference?
I have seen people do that as well as you described, but I don't think it is a reason to allow it. No.
Okay, thank you, Arav. The next question is from Gabriel Martindale in Yerushalayim. Should we say the 3rd paragraph of Shema at night?
In brief, I think we should. It's true that in ancient times, particularly in Eretz Yisrael, they did not recite the third paragraph in its entirety. They just began and the very beginning and the very end. They skipped most of the third parasha of Shema. On the other hand, we find in Chazal that there are several reasons why reading the third parasha is important. It's not only the mitzvah of tzitzit, which tends not to be mitzvah at night because we tend to undress and not wear, as we spoke before, not wear a four-cornered garment at night. And so tzitizit is not really the issue, but there are other important things in that parasha, referring to minut, avodah zarah, hirhur halev, lema'an tizkeru, etc. All these ideas are very important ideas, as Chazal explicitly mentioned. So is it absolutely required? No, it's not. My minhag is definitely to recite the entire third parasha. I do not see any cogent reason why we should not. I can think of several reasons, as I just explained, why we should.
Okay, thank you. The next question is from David in Jerusalem. What should one recite during bedtime Shema?
That's an interesting question. The bracha known as Birkat HaMapil appears in the Talmud Bavli. It does not appear in the Talmud Yerushalmi. The reason is that in Eretz Yisrael, generally, people said kriyat Shema with the brachot and ended with hashkivenu and went to sleep. That was generally what people did, and there was therefore no need and no room for such a bracha, such as Hamapil. But nevertheless, one can, if one is not reading kriyat Shema. So let me restate that. If one says kriyat Shema with the brachot before going to sleep, you don't have to say anything else. You don't have to add anything. You can add the pasuk mentioned in the Talmud, v'yadecha afkid ruhi paditha ofi Adonai el amath, or you could recite the Perek Sadi Aleph in Tehillim, Yoshev B'Sefer Alyon, Shir Shel Pechaim, as is mentioned with regards to Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, but you don't have to. If you say Kriyat Shema with the brachot, you can go straight to sleep. If you say Kriyat Shema earlier, now when you're about to go to sleep, I would recommend saying a shortened version, because the version that you find in most Sidurim, etc., is somewhat bloated. A shortened version of Hamapil, but I'm not saying that's an absolute chovah, but I don't think it's a bad idea either. And the first parasha of Shema, and one of those pasukim that I mentioned a moment ago.
Thank you. The next question is from Binyamin Lenkin in Ramat Bet Shemesh. Is there a mitzvah to extend Shabbat past the regular set HaShabbat?
What is called regular set HaShabbat, in other words, the time that is advertised in all the usual publications that we see on the internet or printed format, telling you when set HaShabbat is, that already includes quite a number of minutes beyond the actual end of Shabbat. In other words, it's not only Shlosha hakochavim benoniyim, it's based on the calculation of Shlosha hakochavim katanim and then some. So there is no real mitzvah to extend the Shabbat beyond the advertised time of set Shabbat. No.
Okay, thank you. Binyamin, did you have anything to clarify that? I don't think we've got Binyamin on the line. I'll move on to the next question. And we've got time for one more question, which is from Yitzhak and Sarah Rietti in Jerusalem. Do we say ha'etz on 100% fruit juice and ha'adama on blended vegetable soup?
Very interesting and important question. We haven't got time to go into it at length, so briefly, the answer is yes. And that is what I do also, and I think this is well solidly founded in the halachic sources, that on pure fruit juice, I say boreh peri ha'es, or it could be vegetable juice, like beetroot juice or what have you, and then I would say boreh peri ha'adama. And the same is true for blended vegetable soup. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yitzhak, are you on, or Sarah, are you on the line at the moment? Do you want anything clarified?
No, that's good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Rav, do we have time for one more question?
Definitely. Let's try and finish the questions that we have.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you. So we have Svi in Queens. Can a tandoor furnace clay be used for dairy and meat?
If I understand correctly, we're talking about some kind of oven, which is something like a furnace, very hot, and it's made of clay. I suppose it resembles in some way what some people refer to as a pizza oven or something like that. I'm not quite sure exactly what a tandoor is, but I imagine that's what we're talking about. So the answer is yes, but if the food was cooked in this oven was not covered, then you need to bring the that oven or that furnace up to maximum temperature and leave it there for a short time before cooking the next thing. All right.
Okay, thank you. I don't see Svi, so we'll move on to the next question. David in Jerusalem, is there any merit to the minhag of kissing religious items, Sifrei Torah, Sifrei Kodesh, mezuzot, tzitizit, tefillin, as a sign of respect?
As suggested, it is exactly that. It is a sign of respect, of love for Hashem and His mitzvot. It is an indication. It is an expression of our simcha and our desire to perform Hashem's mitzvot, and we are happy and excited to do so. So it's a beautiful popular minhag. It's not a halacha, and if a person doesn't want to do it, he doesn't have to do it. But it is it's done intuitively and spontaneously by Jews as an expression of how they feel. It's true that some people might be so used to doing this that it becomes a mechanical action and therefore devoid of meaning. That's also true. That can be true of many things. So it's a nice thing, but it's certainly not required.
Thank you. The next question is from Mayor Morozov in Jerusalem. If we see that the reason why people don't shave or cut their hair during the Omer is not based on actual halacha, then why can one only shave before Shabbat? Why not any day?
Another good question. The truth of the matter is, min hadin, you can shave every day during Sefirat HaOmer, because the minhag is very tenuous and unclear and even problematic, certainly when it comes to days like Rosh Chodesh or Shabbath. And most people are not perturbed by the fact that they cannot shave, they won't shave in the middle of the week for a few days, but Likrat Shabbat or Rosh Chodesh or certain other days, many people would like to. And with regards to those days, I have said, and I repeat, that I think it's not only mutar to shave Lichvot Shabbat, I think it's a chava to do so, if one does so usually on a regular basis, and assuming that we're talking about shaving in a manner which is mutar. Mitzad adin, it's mutar to do it every day, because I do not believe that Hazal clearly did not have this in mind, and it's not therefore a takana or a gzera of the chachamim. This was a popular minhag that grew up amongst the Jewish people. But it's interesting to note, to mention briefly, why did this minhag grow up? And it's the same with Lag BaOmer, which is something we could discuss for another hour, and we won't. But briefly, the real historical reason for celebrating or commemorating Lag BaOmer in any way at all has nothing to do with Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai and nothing to do with the Zohar, nothing to do with Kabbalah. And therefore, there is absolutely no reason to go to Meron. And I know that I'm saying this in the wake of a terrible tragedy that befell all of Am Yisrael just 3 days ago. But I have been, to be fair, I have been saying this for decades, that that which goes on in Meron every year, and even throughout the year, is, in Hebrew we would say, in halachic parlance, we would say, is a davar mechuar. It's something unseemly and improper and not in any way positive. That is my view. And if things are done in a manner where common sense and caution and reasonable behavior are not employed, then Hashem Yerachem, we see unfortunately what terrible things can happen. The real reason, the historical reason, going back to the time of the mered of Shimon ben Kuseba, known as Bar Kochava, against the Romans, which at first was very successful. The real reason for celebrating and mentioning and commemorating that day was precisely because it commemorated the initial victories against the Romans, apparently. That's apparently what's going on. This is the only explanation that one can offer when we find in certain Ashkenazi sources that on Lag BaOmer, the children were sent out into the forest to play with bows and arrows. Why would people send children into the forest on Lag BaOmer to play with bows and arrows? Obviously, it's commemorating some ancient military event which the Jewish people wanted to recall. So Lag BaOmer became a day of celebration and of remembering the initial success of the revolt against the Romans. However, unfortunately, in the end, the revolt was quashed. And there was a tremendous bloodletting, and it was a tremendous blow to the Jewish people in general, and particularly to the Jews living in Eretz Yisrael. And it was almost a death blow altogether for the existence of Jews in Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, that period of time when the rebellion was at its end, or nearly at its end, became days when the Jews commemorated and recalled what had occurred, what had befallen them, and it was some kind of popular, again, spontaneous and intuitive action that the Jewish people adopted. Various practices, not to do this, not to do that, such as, shall we say, not getting married. But again, not getting married for a period of 7 weeks, or even for a period of 5 weeks, is an extreme and irrational response to what happened nearly 2,000 years ago. And that's precisely why Chazal did not enact any such thing, because that's the wrong response. I don't think Chazal, had they been asked, had they been aware of these minhagim, I don't think they would have been in favor of them. So we have to understand the original, all the various practices, both the happy practices and the mournful practices, with regards to the time of Sfirat HaOmer or Lag BaOmer, are all connected, without a doubt, to those historical events, which were momentous and in the end tragic and a huge work. It worked out that this was a huge disaster for the Jewish people. So one can understand why these practices were adopted, but to adopt a practice which leads to a lack of kavod Shabbat, for example, or Rosh Chodesh, is a practice which is not based on clear-headed Torah thinking, and that's precisely why Chazal did not enact such things. So I hope I've answered that question.
Thank you. And the next question is from Yitzchak and Sarah Rieti in Jerusalem. Is it forbidden to drink between Arvit, Motz'ei Shabbat, and Havdalah?
One is not allowed to eat on Motz'ei Shabbat before making Havdalah. But to drink, if one is thirsty, one may certainly drink water.
Thank you. Yitzchak or Sarah, do you have anything to be clarified?
Okay. Let me just add something to that. The only time when a person is thirsty, the only time it is asur to drink water is on a fast day, on a day when one is required to fast. Any other time, when one gets up in the morning before davening or before saying kiddush on Erev Shabbat, etc., if a person is thirsty, one may drink water. There is no need to suffer a feeling and suffer thirst and feel that one is dying for a drink. That's not necessary. It's not correct. Rambam says explicitly with regards to kiddush that one may drink water, not wine, but water before kiddush, and the same certainly applies. Even kal v'chomer applies with regards to Motz'ei Shabbat.
Thank you. Yitzchak, did you have anything to ask?
Yes. What about tea or juice or anything other than wine that's not wine or water?
No, only water. Before Havdalah, only water.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Arav. Just a couple of things that came up in the chat during the answers. On the question of tzedakah, is there a precise percentage, a precise percentage of one's income that one is required to give, such as 10%?
I do not believe there is a precise percentage. It depends almost entirely on a person's income and his needs, his obligations. So I don't think that I can give any definitive answer to that. The idea that one is hayav to set aside 10% of one's income, I don't think that is also. I do not believe that is well founded in halakha either. But that's a longer discussion.
Thank you. And another question that on the topic of plag hamincha and Erev Shabbat, it often happens that the shul is running late for the plag minyan, and they end up starting a minute before plag or even starting after plag. Does that mess up plans to say Arvit early?
First of all, when it comes to such a halakha as this one does not have to be absolutely precise. There's leeway for a couple of minutes, more or less. Second of all, with regards to Erev Shabbat, there's no real question, because it's clear from the Talmud, this is what the Rif and the Rambam write, that Erev Shabbat, without any reference to when one daven mincha, one may daven Arvit before the end of the day. Tfilat Arvit shel Shabbat may be davened be'erev Shabbat. So dafka on Erev Shabbat, it's not an issue. During the week, it's a bit more of a question, but then again, we don't have to be quite such sticklers when it comes to the time. In other words, 2 or 3 minutes either way is still okay. I'm not saying that with reference to davening mincha 2 or 3 minutes after the sun has set. You can daven mincha 2 or 3 minutes after the sun has set. It's just not mincha, it's arvit. As I've explained in other shiurim, that as a very wise man, a friend of mine once said to me, you can daven any time you like. The question is what you davened. If it's this time of day, it's called shaharit, and if it's that kind of time of day, it's called mincha, and if it's anything else, it's called arvit. And that's true, except for the half an hour after midday, after hasot hayom, when you're not supposed to daven mincha. Beyond that, you can daven any time at all. If you davened Shemona Esrei after the shkiya, and you thought it was mincha, you were wrong. It wasn't mincha, it was arvit. But anyhow, with regards to Erev Shabbat, you may bring in Shabbat early and say Arvit early without reference. According to many Rishonim, certainly ideally you should have daven mincha before plag hamincha, but even if you did not do so, you may still daven Arvit early.
Thank you very much, Rav, for answering all our questions. I'm just going to post again the link to the questionnaire for those who are interested in getting involved in Machon Shilo on a local level. I'll give people a few seconds to click on or save that link. Thanks once again to the Rav for giving up his time again, and thank you everyone for submitting questions and for joining us. And I wish everyone a very good evening.
It's cool. Thank you to all of you for all of your questions. Mikol Melamdai Hiskalti. Many good questions, which shows that there are many people out there who are thinking and asking good questions, and kol hakavod lachem. And it is my pleasure and honor to discuss these things with you. Shalom, shalom.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org. If you are inspired by Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to get involved in Torah Eretz Yisrael activities in your local area, please fill out the relevant form by going to the link which appears on the screen.